Also set in LA, right? I think it's also
Sure.
crazy. So here I am, and sitting there in this meeting with Lion Records, about to sign a contract for several, £100,000, life-changing contract, and signed the record deal, and they sent me off to New Orleans to work with a band called Major Lazer. Then they sent me to LA for like a few months, living in Silver Lake over there, which is a bit lonely on Shabbos. It's not so easy over there. But I was making my album, and I was, really living the dream of a young singer-songwriter/producer. And things were going, amazing. I made my album, and I came back to the UK with this record that I'd made, and played it to Island Records. They were really happy, and they released the first single from the record, a song called Up All Night, which is not about Tick and Nail. Or Ashana Rabba, believe it or not. So I put out this record, and nothing really happens with it. It's a kind of an edgy sort of reggaeton, punk rock fusion track. It doesn't quite work in the mainstream, and it gets played on like the new music shows, but it doesn't get playlisted on any radio stations. But it creates a bit of a positive bit of promotion, and my live shows are playing to 100 people. Started building momentum, 200, 300 people, 400 people. And we put out the next single, a song called Too Close, and it goes into the charts in the Netherlands and in Romania, which are the two smallest markets in Europe. But that's okay. But in England, my native country where I was, no one was really buying or listening to my music at all, which is very frustrating for my record label. And then my record label looked in the calendar and they were like, Alex, we see that you keep turning down promotional opportunities. Your music will be getting played on the radio. You've been offered loads of spots on different shows and different club nights, but you keep turning them down. I said, yeah, because they're on Shabbos. So and I was like, oh, on Shabbos, on the Jewish day of rest, on Saturdays they don't work. And they were like, really? I said, yes, absolutely. So they were getting frustrated. They were getting frustrated with me. Springtime of 2011. Springtime of 2011, there is a young lady, also from South London, called Adele, and she's going on tour. And my manager at the time's girlfriend was her roommate, and she offered me to go on tour with her, which was very nice. Springtime, spring tour, and I said yes. And then I looked in the calendar, and obviously, right in the middle of that 2.5-week tour was Pesach. So I said to my record label, guys, you remember that thing I got called Shabbos? They said, yes. I said, well, I've got this thing, it's basically a week of Shabbos. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, there's 2 days Yom Tov, then there's Chol Hamoed, and Shabbos is in the middle of Chol Hamoed this year, and then we've got 2 more days of Yom Tov, it's basically 8 days of Shabbos. And they were like, are you mad? I was like, yeah, probably. So anyway, they got very nervous, but they realised they couldn't do much about it. And they said, okay, we'll have to try and find other ways to make this work. So throughout that summer, just to add a little note, this is exactly at the time when Spotify was launched. So people started consuming music very differently. So whereas before you could play, a 500 capacity venue, and that would translate as 500 albums sold, no one was buying albums, no one was buying music, so the record labels are all freaking out. So even though they can see I'm building momentum in terms of what I'm doing on my live stuff, it doesn't correlate to any music sales for them, because they haven't figured out a way to make any money on Spotify yet. So everyone was freaking out, and as a result, people like me were like, the worst. Absolutely the worst. Doing nothing to promote music outside of a live setting. So throughout the summer, the live scene was flourishing, touring all over Europe, playing music festivals all over the place. And then at the end of the summer, I said to the record label, I said, guys, do you remember when I had a week of Shabbos? And they said, yes. I said, well, I've got a month of Shabbos. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, it's Tishrei. And in Tishrei, we've got 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. 10 days later, we've got Yom Kippur. And 5 days after that, we've got a whole bunch of days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. So I said, that's basically a month. So don't book any shows for me in that month. And they said, all right, whatever. Motzei Yom Kippur that year. Motzei Yom Kippur, I come home from shul, I turn on my phone and I see a message from my record label telling me to call them immediately. And I call them, I said, Alex, we've got an amazing gig for you live on the BBC. Amazing opportunity. And the best thing is, it's not on a Saturday or a Friday. I said, amazing. I said, when is it? What is it? And they said, it's on a Thursday. So I said, brilliant. Which Thursday? Now this is Shabbos, Motzei Shabbos, Motzei Yom Kippur. They said, well actually Alex, it's next Thursday. I said, next Thursday? I said, did you know that next Thursday happens to be the Jewish holiday of Sukkot? And he said, yes. I said, are you aware that Sukkot is in many ways just like the Sabbath? And they said, yes, we're aware. And I said, so did you know that I can't do the gig? And they said, yeah, we know. So I said, well, can we maybe do the show in a couple of weeks later? And I said, no, Alex, that's the gig you've been offered. And to be honest, Alex, it's a really good opportunity. Playing live on the BBC, you're going to be broadcast to millions of people. And we have to tell you, if you don't take this gig, then we're going to have to let you go. We're going to have to let you go because it seems that you're much more into your religion than you are into your music career. So I said, oh yeah, it's kind of true. It's not so far from the truth. They said, well, Alex, we can't, we've invested a lot of money in you, we haven't seen a return, and we can't keep doing this. So I didn't think they would let me go. I really didn't. I thought, politically correct, being politically correct, you can't just fire someone for being Jewish. Turns out you can. It's totally fine if you're in breach of a contract. And by me not working on Shabbos, it wasn't seen as turning down promotional opportunities. It's a real tough one to get around legally. And they let me go. They fired me, which was great. It was awful. I went from being like this musician who was like a complete bum. I was like living on people's couches and scratching a living being a musician, to suddenly having a massive record deal, being able to pay like rent on an apartment and like traveling all over the world making music, working with these biggest producers in the world and hanging around with amazing people, with a massive major label behind me pushing me. And now suddenly I had a couple of £1,000 in my bank, enough to pay my rent, because making an album is exceptionally expensive, especially when you're working with producers of this caliber and this level. It costs a lot of money, it takes a lot of resources. So I really suddenly lost all this infrastructure of that a record label offers you: radio promotion, press, people doing the artwork for your albums. Not only that, but I got a phone call mid-October from my band who were very upset with me. And I didn't know why they were upset, but they were on a retainer, meaning I paid them per gig, but to keep them on a retainer, the record label also gave them a little bit of money every month, which actually added up to quite a bit. And I didn't know, but my contract stipulated that if I got dropped, being that they got paid every financial quarter, if I got dropped in that financial quarter, I would now have to pay my band whatever that retainer was. So I was now £11,000 in debt. From having £2,000 to just basically pay my rent and survive till the end of the month, I was now £11,000 in debt to the one lifeline I had left, my band. And they were upset and they said, we're not going to work for you if you can't pay us. I was like, that's fair enough. So I really didn't know what to do. That was my only chance of maintaining a career in the ever. So I went to my Rav in London. It's like a big tzaddik called Rav David Turventaft, very special person. If ever you're in London, go say hello. Very nice person. You can text him your shyness. Very good. It's great. All right. So I went to him and I said, I'm Rebbe. I'm in a really bad situation. I really, ani kibusalekim li toiv. Mamish. Like for me, I'm having a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Learning the Torah HaKadosh, keeping Shabbos is everything. Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely everything, but I worked really hard to have a career in music, and I've been given massive opportunities, and they've all just been taken away from me. Like everything's been taken away from me, and I don't know what to do. I can't pay my rent, can't pay my band, and my career is basically blacklisted in the industry. Because I keep Shabbos, because I keep Yom Tov. So he sat for a second and he said, Alex, you're a shtickle Avraham Avinu. Which made my ears prick up. Go on, Rabbi. He said, Alex, you're shtickle Avraham Avinu. He says, Avraham Avinu lived and grew up in a place where there was no awareness of godliness. There was a Avodah Zarah, but to understand, the actus of Hashem, that was Abraham's Chiddush. Abraham was a person who said, I believe in Hashem and I want to serve Hashem. He says, Alex, you did the same thing. You did the same thing. You're a shtickle Avraham Avinu. He says, Avraham Avinu was given 10 challenges, 10 tests, and so too, you've been given a test. He says, Alex, the hardest test that Abraham had to face was in Kedas Yitzchak. The hardest challenge. Wait 97 years, have a son. The Zohar says something beautiful about this, by the way. We always have this like Hava Mina when it comes to Kedas Yitzchak. It's a good Hava Mina that Kedas Yitzchak wasn't the son. You think that's the Nisayon of taking his son and tying him up? So that wasn't the Nisayon. The Nisayon was the Yaras HaMakom Merachok. Now, for all the other Nisyonis, Avraham Avinu had to face them. He felt completely connected to Hashem. He felt Hashem was right there with him. But the Zohar says, the Yaras HaMakom Merachok, when it came to Kedas Yitzchak, the hardest challenge he ever had, he felt like Hashem wasn't even there. He felt like Hashem was a million miles from him, and that was the Messiah. So he said, Alex, you have to know that Kedas Yitzchak was the hardest thing for Avraham Avinu to do. He says that Hashem told him to do it, so he did it. Can you imagine how difficult and how painful that must have been? He says, but Alex, every single one of us that's alive today is alive in the schus of that decision. Kedas Yitzchak was what gave Avraham Avinu the bracha, the blessing that he should be zochah to have Am Yisrael as his descendants. All here alive because of Kedas Yitzchak. He says, Alex, I promise you, if you're over Nisayon, you stand up in this Nisayon, and you do the right thing for Hashem, you make the sacrifices and the most in the right areas, I promise you will see Siyata D'Shemaya. I said, Rabbi, that's very nice. Can't pay my rent. Can't pay my band. Career is over. I don't know what to do. He says, Alex, I promise you will see Siyata D'Shemaya. So I said, thank you, Rabbi. That's great. Not going to pay my bills. Can you lend me a tenner? And went home, sobbed probably. Next day, double Shacharis. After Shacharis, a friend of mine offered to buy me a coffee and let me vent and complain about my life. Something I try not to do nowadays, but then self-indulgent musicians. So I sit there complaining to a friend of mine the next morning. While I'm sitting there complaining, I get a phone call from a promoter in Germany, in Berlin, who was promoting a design exposition, a furniture show. Wild. And it's a big international conference they were having, and they had a big party, and the band who was supposed to play at this concert, the singer got laryngitis, and she couldn't perform. An English band called the Noisettes, who were quite big at the time. So they looked through the music press, and they found me, and they were like, let's try this guy. So they called me up, and they said, Alex, can you come and do a show in Berlin tomorrow? And I said, I don't have a band. And they said, he says, well, we've got a fee of £11,000. He said, boy, he said, you've got £11,000, is that okay? It's like, give me a minute. I phone up my band and they say, guys, I've got to tell you something crazy. I know you're upset with me. I've been offered a gig in Berlin tomorrow, and if you do the gig, I can't pay you for the gig. I can't pay you for the gig, but I can pay you every penny I owe you up until now, if you do the show. They agreed, so we flew to Berlin and we played the show, and within less than 24 hours my debt to my band was cleared. First piece of Siyata D'Shemaya. It gets crazier. It gets crazier. This is why we say that, I was saying earlier about the shame at night. You don't see Hashem explicitly. You have to just peel past the Hestapanim and you can see it. So, I don't know what to do with my life. My career is over. And I had this 5-year plan to go to yeshiva. I was going to go learn Torah. That was kind of always in my plan. Make an album, tour, go to yeshiva. Make an album, tour, go back to yeshiva. Now, that sort of 3, 4, 5-year plan had now been fast-tracked and moved forward. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to yeshiva. I'm going to go learn Torah. I want to. So, because now, a perfect time, my career is not really going anywhere, I'll go learn. So I decided to go and learn Torah in Yerushalayim. All of a sudden, I get an email from a young man called Keith Rivers. Keith actually lives in Malibu now. At the time he lived in Seattle. And Keith messaged me to tell me, he said, Alex, I've heard your song Too Close. I really like it. Can I use it for a Microsoft ad campaign? I was like, yeah, that's good. And he said, great, now I'll give you a bit of background. This is the Hashgacha Pratis, the Hamelech that you see behind the scenes, and this is insane. Now, my album that I'd released had sold a few thousand copies in Europe and probably 100 copies in the US. Very few people had bought my album. One person who bought my album was a guy, a musician called Blake, who lived in LA. Keith lives in Seattle. Keith gets an email from Microsoft one day saying, we see you're a young TV producer living in Seattle. We're in Seattle. Can you pitch a commercial for us? He says, sure. He makes a commercial. He plays it to them. They love it, but they don't like the music. And they say, you need to get some more up-to-date music for this commercial, but we love what you've done with the visuals. Find another song. So Keith, who's about 27 at the time, has the opportunity of a lifetime making an advert for Microsoft. So he's like, I've really got to find a piece of music. So where do you find music in America? You go to LA. So he sets up meetings with music supervisors. They have the easiest job in the world, music supervisors. They're the people that listen to records all day, and when there's a TV show being made, basically sync the music to the TV show. So, great job. So he sets up a bunch of meetings with music supervisors. He gets enough flight to LA, and before he even walks in to a meeting with the music supervisors, he goes to his friend Blake's house where he's staying for the few days that he's here. He walks into Blake's house, and Blake is playing a CD from an unknown English artist called Alex Clare. He's playing a song called Too Close.
Sorry, just a quick interruption. If anybody's parked illegally, we'll give you tickets.
Someone's van's about to get a ticket with your hazards on, and all the cars in the red's get a ticket, but, you know.
But if it's worth a ticket, you go say.
That's expensive parking, isn't it, really?
$68 for entry.
So Keith flies into LA to meet music supervisors, goes to the Aksanya where he's staying, the Eshel where he's staying, walks into this young man Blake's house. Blake is one of the 100 people in America who bought my album. He's playing my album as Keith walks in. Keith says, this is great, I've never had anything like this, can I borrow this? He says yes, he takes it, he puts it onto his computer, he syncs it up to his commercial, and it is a perfect fit. He flies back to Seattle, plays it to Microsoft love it. They're like, this is awesome, you've got the gig. But you've got permission to use the song, right? So Keith's like, yeah, of course I have, Absolutely. He starts freaking out because he doesn't. So he starts emailing Island Records, but I've just been dropped. He doesn't know I've been dropped, but I've just been dropped like a label. So they're ignoring every email that comes in with my name attached to it. They don't care, they use Alex Clare, forget that guy. So Keith is really panicking now because he's about to lose the opportunity of a lifetime. And so he starts panicking, and he goes through all the credits on my album, and he sees, who wrote the song Too Close. And he looks in the album sleeve and it says, Alex Clare wrote Too Close. He's like, why don't I just contact Alex Clare? So he emails my music publisher and says, can you give me Alex Clare's details? And my music publisher was like, sure, message Alex Clare, here you go. And he said, Alex, we want to use the commercial, we want to give you $75,000. I'm like, yes! All right! Absolutely, I can stay in the shoe for the rest of my life. That's it. And turns out that I owed my record label like way more than that, and the album hadn't made any money. So until that was recouped, I didn't see a penny of that 75,000. I went straight to my record label. Anyway, I went to Yerushalayim. So that's over. I was like, that's it. So I'm sitting in Yerushalayim. 1 month goes by, 2 months go by, 3 months go by, and something really crazy starts happening. I start getting emails from radio stations all over the world being like, Alex, can we interview you? I don't know why they want to interview me, but then I find out that basically that TV commercial was being played all over the world. Now, people were shazamming the song Too Close, which is the song that had come out. And as a result, the radio stations were like, why are all these people downloading this song? we're not playing on the radio, so where they're hearing it, so the radio stations start playing too close. So suddenly the song goes into the airplay charts all over the world. Then people start buying it, like buying actual CDs, because the people who listen to the radio don't go on Spotify, they buy CDs. So as a result, it starts selling tens of thousands of copies every single day all over the world. Meanwhile, I'm singing Yerushalayim, learning Torah, oblivious. And things start getting really weird. And eventually I get a phone call from, a promoter in Germany, a guy called Uli, who worked for Universal Music, who had the license for my song in Germany. He said, Alex, you need to come to Germany. I said, why? He said, well, you're going to be #1 tomorrow in the charts. I'm like, why? He's like, yeah, your songs are selling quite well, and you're going to be #1 here, so would you come? So I spoke to the Rosh Hashiva, and I said, something weird is happening. He said, what? And I said, well, I made this piece of music a couple of years ago, and it's becoming quite popular, and I'm going to be #1 in Germany. He was like, guys, what does that mean? #1 in Germany. I said, it means I'm selling music. He said, Parnassa? I said, Parnassa. He said, oh. He says, yeah. He said, you need that. You need to go. So he said, just go for 3 days. Go for 3 days, then do whatever you have to do, but come straight back. Oh, very good. So I went for 3 days, and I did a bunch of promo. And I was #1 in Germany. So while I'm in Germany, being told I'm #1 and sitting in a radio station, I get a phone call from Radio 1. Now, Radio 1 in the UK is the biggest broadcaster in the UK, is the BBC, obviously. And they wouldn't play my music. Now they put me on the A-list. I'm getting played every hour, which is nuts. I find out a week or so later that I'm #1 in the airplay charts in the US. And I'm #1 on the indie charts in the US, and #7 on the Billboard Hot 100. And all the while I'm in Yerushalayim, living in Yeshiva. So it was wild. So anyway, the story goes on, but there's a lot more details. Oh, Gamzul Tova. The Gamzul Tova moment. Now, we know that Tzaddikim are judged if you miss a din. It's heavy. It's not so fun being a tzaddik. The Tzaddikim, when they get judged by Hashem, they get both barrels. It's rough. It's rough to be a tzaddik. But for the rest of us, Hashem judges us for Midas Arachim, which is great. Thank you, Hashem, for like Midas Arachim, because it's awesome. There were tzaddikim who were most living in the place of din all the time, and one of the most famous is Nachmish Gamzu. Nachmish Gamzu, the famous story is that he was once riding his donkey, which was loaded with drinks and bread and food. And he saw an Ani who was starving, and the Ani said, Rebbe, can you give me something to eat or to drink? And he said, give me a minute, give me a moment. And in that moment of hesitation, the Ani passed away. Now, Nachmish Gamzu suffered tremendously, exceptionally, and almost cruelly because of what happened, because he was a big tzaddik. And the Talmidim asked him, Rebbe, why are you suffering so much? Why are you in so much pain? Why are you crippled? And he told them the story. He said, it's mamish Gamzul Tova. This is from Hashem, and this is also good. I'm not Nachmish Gamzu. But my Gamzul Tova moment was this. If my record label hadn't have dropped me, if they hadn't fired me, then I had to give me basically a year's salary to make another record. But now, I was a free agent, I was dropped from my record label, and I was now a #1 selling artist all over the world. So suddenly I became a very, very lucrative asset for any record label. I was given a record deal that was worth 3 times more than my original one, without any cross-collateralization, meaning I was significantly better off because I was dropped. If I hadn't been fired, I would have gone to Yeshiva, #1. And #2, I would have been hundreds of thousands of pounds worse off because of it. Crazy. So Hashem, sometimes you have to just, Yeshua's Baruch Hu, comes instantly. And the moment is, hop onto it when you get it. You see it, grab it, and I was opening my life to see the Taitzah, the Poel, the Chesed of Hashem, because of the certain decisions I made. And it didn't really feel like Bechira Chofshis at the time. I didn't really feel like I was making an actual choice. It just was like, Shabbos or not Shabbos, it's, because Shabbos isn't really a choice. Shabbos is, it's everything. It's Makor HaBracha. There's nothing like Shabbos Kodesh. So that's the Megillah. That's Megillah Alexander. That's the first bit anyway. Shabbat.
Yeah, that's Clare.
I made an album, I went on tour for like 3 or 4 years, and then I went back to Yeshiva in 2015 and stayed there for 10 years, which was great. So, I'll see you there.
You hear the song?
I don't know if